I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume, so I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. We are continuing with the Gospels. We are right at that last day before the Passover and Christ's last week, where he will perform the atoning sacrifice. And what we've been reading has been his great prophecy of the last days. It is recorded in Matthew chapter 24, Mark chapter 13, and Luke chapter 21. So we've read it in Matthew, and we also read the Joseph Smith translation. We then read it in Mark, and we read the Joseph Smith translation. And we've read it in Luke. Now, the Joseph Smith translation of Matthew and Mark made the two unified, made them say the same basic thing. Not completely identical, but very much, they now give the same timeline. They give the same order of events. They have the same parables. They have the same, all the basics are there. Now, we read in Luke, and it has some differences. It's worded differently than the other two, which is not unusual. And now we are going to read the Joseph Smith translation of Luke and see if it is also brought into unity with the other two. So this is the Joseph Smith translation of Luke, chapter 21, verses 5 through 38. And it's not nearly as significantly corrected as Matthew or Mark. So verse 5 has no corrections. We start in 6. In verse 6, we no longer start it as for these things. It's just these things which ye behold. And later on, we change that to which shall not be thrown down. And then, well, let's read verses 7 through 9 together. It now says, And the disciples asked him, saying, Master, when shall these things be? And what sign wilt thou shew when these things shall come to pass? And he said, The time draweth near, and therefore take heed that ye be not deceived. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ. Go ye not therefore after them. And when ye shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified. For these things must first come to pass, but this is not the end. Nothing really, just some minor clarifications. In verse 12, we just have at the beginning now, it says, But before all these things shall come, they shall lay their hands on you. So just that minor clarification there. In verse 13, though, is just removed, and I think it is actually put down to the end of verse 15 now. So let us read verses 14 and 15. It says, Settle this therefore in your hearts, not to meditate before what ye shall answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist, and it shall turn to you for a testimony. So it's no longer the signs that turn to you for a testimony, but it is the Spirit working in you, telling you what to say, that turns for your testimony. Now verse 17 states, And ye shall be hated of all the world for my name's sake. And then in 21 we have a number here, and we read now, Then let them who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them who are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them who are in the countries return to enter into the city. Minor grammatical clarifications. Now, I will say, this is interesting that in Mark, Mark also talks about the Spirit telling you what you will say when the time comes. When you stand before kings, don't worry about what you're going to say, because the Spirit will tell you. Mark has that too, but that is removed in the Joseph Smith translation. But it is not removed from Luke. So that is interesting. Luke actually does seem to have a different take on this prophecy, you might say. In verse 23, that is now who. That are with who are with child, who give suck. Now verses 25 through 29 are significantly changed, so we will read the whole thing here. Now these things he spake unto them concerning the destruction of Jerusalem. And then his disciples asked him, saying, Master, tell us concerning the coming. And he answered them and said, In the generation in which the times of the Gentiles shall be fulfilled, there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexities, like the sea and the waves roaring. The earth also shall be troubled, and the waters of the great deep, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for the day of your redemption draweth nigh. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And he spake to them a parable, saying, Behold the fig tree and all the trees. Well, I guess 29 didn't really need to be read with the rest of that, but that it gives us a little bit more that. So remember in Matthew and Mark, Christ talked to him about the destruction of the temple while in Jerusalem. Then he goes out to the Mount of Olives, and in private the apostles come to him and ask him about these events in the last days. So now we have that same kind of thing happening here in Luke. He's been teaching the people about the destruction in the last days and all that, and then the apostles come to him and ask him for some clarity, and he starts telling them about what will happen in the time of when the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled, which is our day. This is the time of the Gentiles. And so he's now telling me, what he told them before is what was going to happen to you, or was going to happen to the Jews and the early Christians, and then they come and ask for clarity, and says, okay, in that day, when I come, or just before I come, this is what's going to happen. And also note that the coming of the Son of Man is now after all of this, and he says to look up and you'll see the coming. So that's all very interesting. But it's not, we've read about it in Matthew and Mark already. So let us continue. In verse 32, it now states this, Verily I say unto you, this generation, the generation when the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled, shall not pass away till all be fulfilled. So again, it's our generation that will not pass away before all this happens. It's now that he's talking about. Not then, not at his time, but our time. And now in verse 34 through 36, let's read this together. It now says, Let my disciples therefore take heed to themselves, lest at any time their hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and cares of this life, and that day come upon them unawares. For as a snare it shall come on all them who dwell on the face of the whole earth. And what I say unto one, I say unto all. Watch ye therefore, and pray always, and keep my commandments, that ye may be counted worthy to escape all these things which shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man, when he shall come clothed in the glory of his Father. So again, we have the, watch and waiting. I do want to mention the word surfeiting there, which very archaic term. This means debauchery or reveling, rioting, kind of just giving way to your baser passions. I forgot to mention that when reading in the King James. So now in verse 37, it is no longer called the Mount of Olives, but just called Olives. And then in verse 38, we remove the word all. So, and the people came early. This is not quite as detailed. It does not change things quite as much, but it does clarify. It does bring the meaning more in unity with what we have in the Joseph Smith translation of Matthew and Mark, though it doesn't simply rewrite it like Matthew and Mark did. So we do definitely see, again, Matthew was one of the apostles. He probably had a more complete understanding, a more complete recollection of what Christ had said, everything that Christ had said. Mark was likely one of the 70, and most likely wrote his gospel under the dictation of Peter. So they would have a more complete understanding and complete knowledge of Christ's words. Luke, being a Gentile converted after the resurrection, is just giving an account. He's more of the historian giving an account. Matthew and Mark are biographers, and Luke is more of a historian. And so we get this difference in their writing, which is perfectly logical when we understand what their purposes are and what their perspectives are. I'm going to leave that there. In our next video, we will be back in Matthew. So I will see you there.